What if the word feminism wasn't something to whisper, but something to wear like armor, with pride? Before we talk about the world we could live in, let's talk about the one we live in now. We live in a world where girls are still told to be less loud, less ambitious, less opinionated. We live in a world where boys are told to feel less emotion, less fear, less vulnerability. We are handing down boxes instead of wings. And the truth is, none of us fit. But there is a word, one that has been misunderstood, misused, and misrepresented, that offers us a way out. That word is feminism. Stay with me, because if you think feminism is only about women, you're missing the whole story. If you think it's about man-hating, you're missing the whole point. And if you think it doesn't involve you, you're part of the reason this speech needs to be heard. Feminism is not about making women stronger. Women are already strong. It's about recognizing that strength in a world that too often ignores it, belittles it, or fears it. And here's what many still don't understand. Men need feminism too. A society that teaches men they can't cry, can't show weakness, must dominate to matter. That's not freedom. That's a cage. Feminism unlocks that cage. Feminism is perhaps one of the most powerful yet misunderstood words in modern dialogue. For some, it evokes images of progress, empowerment, and justice. For others, it is met with hesitation, discomfort, or even resentment, not because of what it truly represents, but because of how it has been distorted, rebranded by stereotypes, or misused in moments of anger. But at its core, feminism is not about making one gender superior to another. It is not about reversing oppression or creating a new hierarchy. Feminism is, and always has been, about freedom, the freedom to live fully, to express oneself without fear, and to exist without the heavy burden of outdated expectations. When we say feminism, what we truly mean is the freedom to be human without being told how our gender should limit us. The need for feminism arises from centuries of limitation, imposed not only on women, but on anyone who dares to exist outside the roles they were assigned at birth. Feminism pushes against the idea that a woman's primary value lies in her appearance or her ability to nurture, just as it challenges the notion that a man must be stoic, dominant, or emotionally closed off to be respected. These gender boxes are not just outdated, they are damaging. They stifle potential, shrink dreams, and rob people of the freedom to be fully themselves. Feminism doesn't seek to strip men of their power. It asks why that power should come at the cost of vulnerability. It doesn't aim to elevate women to a throne above men. It asks why the throne exists at all. Critics often dismiss feminism by suggesting it is a quest for dominance disguised as liberation. But this view mistakes equity for competition. The feminism we need is not a battle of the sexes. It is a shared project for mutual freedom. It is not about flipping the scales. It is about balancing them. Real feminism doesn't seek revenge. It seeks repair. It doesn't scream for supremacy. It asks for fairness. And in doing so, it expands the possibilities for everyone. Because when a woman is free to speak without fear of being labeled too emotional, and when a man is free to cry without being seen as weak, both are stepping closer to their true selves. Feminism is about the ability to walk through the world without being categorized or dismissed based on gender. It is the right to safety, to opportunity, and to dignity. It is about a young girl who dreams of becoming a scientist being taken seriously, and a boy who wants to become a dancer being encouraged instead of ridiculed. It is about removing shame from bodies, removing silence from violence, and removing limitations from ambition. At its best, feminism offers a new vocabulary for freedom, one that says you are enough as you are, not as the world expects you to be. It's not a theory reserved for elite academic spaces. It's lived in workplaces, in classrooms, in homes. It's in how we teach our children, how we share responsibilities, how we listen to voices that have been ignored. We must understand that the liberation of one group does not require the suppression of another. This is not a zero-sum game. When women have equal access to education and leadership, economies flourish. When men are supported in their emotional and caregiving roles, families grow stronger. When transgender and non-binary individuals are granted dignity and safety, communities become more compassionate and aware. Feminism, in its truest form, recognizes these truths and works to make them reality. It acknowledges the unique challenges each person faces, but brings us into a collective struggle for justice, not a fragmented fight for individual advantage. What feminism demands is not supremacy, but equity, not a reversal of roles, but a reimagining of what roles can be. It asks why we continue to cling to rigid expectations when we have so much to gain by letting go. The fear that feminism will create chaos is rooted in a misunderstanding that hierarchy is the only way to structure society. But freedom doesn't mean disorder. It means choosing respect over fear, collaboration over control, and empathy over ego. Feminism redefines strength not as dominance, but as the courage to uplift others. It redefines success not as power over others, but power shared. It redefines leadership not by who speaks the loudest, but by who listens with the most care. So when we speak of feminism, let's be clear, we are speaking of freedom, the freedom to break out of molds we never chose, the freedom to live, love, lead, and labor without fear of being diminished, the freedom to shape a world not based on what divides us, but on what unites us, our shared desire to be seen, valued, and free. When we hear the word feminism, many instinctively attach it to women, their rights, their struggles, their voices rising after centuries of silence. And while that association is understandable, it is also incomplete. Feminism is not a closed door reserved only for those born female. It is not a private conversation whispered behind gendered walls. It is a movement that, at its core, confronts a system that has harmed everyone it touches. While women may have been the most visible victims of gender inequality, men have not walked away untouched. In fact, the very structure that feminism seeks to dismantle, a rigid historical hierarchy of gendered expectations, has also chained men in roles that reduce their humanity, silence their emotional lives, and punish their deviations from acceptable masculinity. This is why men need feminism too, not as spectators or reluctant allies, but as full participants in the reshaping of a world where no one is forced into an identity that does not fit. From the time they are boys, men are taught to harden, to toughen their skin, lower their voices, and never, under any circumstances, allow vulnerability to show. They are taught that leadership is theirs to inherit, but tenderness is something they must abandon. They are often told, in direct or subtle ways, that anger is acceptable, but sadness is weakness, that success is power, but caregiving is emasculating, that respect is earned through dominance, not empathy. These messages don't always arrive in loud, obvious ways. Sometimes they're embedded in everyday conversations. Man up. Don't be a girl. Stop crying, be strong. These words seem harmless at first, but over time they become a prison. They carve out an emotional landscape where vast parts of the human experience, softness, confusion, gentleness, are rendered off-limits. And in that landscape, men grow not only detached from others, but often from themselves. Feminism, when truly understood, offers a way out of this emotional poverty. It asserts that men, like women, should be free from the limitations that society places on them. It holds space for the stay-at-home father without judgment, for the sensitive teenager who writes poetry without shame, for the husband who values emotional labor as much as financial contribution. Feminism argues that strength has many shapes, and that none of them require the suppression of feelings. It liberates men from having to be protectors at the cost of their own safety, providers at the expense of their passions, or stoics in moments when they most need connection. In a world shaped by feminist principles, men are no longer defined solely by what they can do for others, but by who they are allowed to be, in fullness, in complexity, in truth. Moreover, feminism challenges the culture of violence that so often surrounds and pressures men. It asks, why do we accept aggression in boys as natural, but empathy as soft? Why do we let young men learn intimacy through domination rather than trust? These aren't easy questions, but they are necessary ones. Feminism seeks to replace that aggression with understanding, that entitlement with equality. It recognizes that patriarchy doesn't just lead to the oppression of women, it teaches boys to numb themselves and men to earn worth through control. And in doing so, it leads to mental health crises, emotional isolation, and even self-destruction. Suicide rates remain significantly higher among men in many parts of the world, not because men are weaker, but because society has denied them the language, the space, and the permission to express pain without ridicule. The fear some men have of feminism stems from a misunderstanding, the idea that empowering others somehow means disempowering them. But feminism is not about flipping the table, it is about removing the table that ever positioned one group above another in the first place. Men are not losing something when they embrace feminism. They are gaining freedom from roles they never chose, gaining the right to parent with equal pride, to grieve without apology, to care and be cared for, to lead with empathy instead of intimidation. Feminism doesn't erase masculinity, it broadens it. It says there is no single way to be a man, and every way that honors humanity, fairness, and connection is welcome. In classrooms, in workplaces, in relationships, feminism offers men the language to connect more deeply, live more authentically, and lead more justly. It invites them to become co-authors in the rewriting of norms that have constrained everyone, and in doing so, it allows them not only to support change, but to experience it firsthand, in their friendships, their families, their internal lives. The invitation feminism extends to men is not one of guilt or blame, but of possibility, the possibility of living in a world where they are not judged by conquest, but by character, not limited by fear, but led by compassion. Empathy is often dismissed as a soft virtue, something secondary to action or strategy, a trait best reserved for interpersonal relationships or moments of emotional vulnerability. But this perception deeply underestimates the true power of empathy, not only as a personal virtue, but as a transformative force capable of changing the course of societies. Empathy is not weakness, it is not indulgence. It is the ability to step outside oneself and imagine the experience of another, to see through their eyes, feel with their heart, and hear with their ears. And when practiced collectively, empathy becomes a catalyst for global change. It shifts policy, it redefines leadership, and it disrupts cycles of violence and apathy. The problems that plague our world, from poverty and war to discrimination and climate collapse, are not merely technical or logistical. They are problems of disconnection, and empathy is the bridge. In a world increasingly shaped by algorithms, borders, and identities that divide, empathy refuses to categorize. It refuses to say us and them. It dares to say, what if their pain were mine? This shift in perception is not passive. It is revolutionary. When empathy enters our systems, healthcare, education, justice, those systems begin to mirror the people they serve. Policies stop being written in abstraction and start being grounded in lived human realities. Leaders stop governing for their base and start listening to those who are usually ignored. Empathy humanizes what has been dehumanized: the refugee, the prisoner, the protester, the worker on the margins. It asks not what they did or how they differ, but how we can share in their story and become accountable to their well-being. That question, what if it were me, has the potential to upend indifference and replace it with radical responsibility. Consider the most enduring movements for justice, civil rights, anti-apartheid, women's liberation, queer liberation, climate justice. At their heart is not just anger, but empathy. Empathy that refuses to look away. Empathy that insists on proximity. Empathy that refuses to turn injustice into statistics and insists on keeping it personal. When one person says, "I can't breathe," and millions respond as if that breath belonged to them too, that is empathy in motion. It is not pity. It is not charity. It is solidarity born from the refusal to remain numb. And this kind of empathy, the kind that stirs people from comfort into action, is what creates movements that ripple across nations and generations. In education, empathy shifts the entire purpose of learning. It tells us that knowledge is not just for individual success, but for collective upliftment. A child who is taught empathy alongside literacy grows up not only to read the world, but to rewrite it. Empathy in classrooms means understanding the needs of every student, not just the top performers. It means seeing trauma behind disruption, potential behind struggle, and unique value behind every voice. When education is built on empathy, it stops ranking students and starts nurturing human beings. That ripple carries into adulthood, shaping how we work, lead, and relate to one another across boundaries we once thought impassable. Empathy also offers a powerful antidote to violence. Where anger burns hot, empathy cools. Where fear divides, empathy builds bridges. When a nation chooses war over diplomacy, it is often because empathy has been drowned out by narratives of otherness and threat. But when people are seen not as enemies but as parents, children, dreamers, survivors, the justification for conflict becomes harder to sustain. Empathy challenges us to imagine the lives we are told to devalue. It invites us to mourn losses we are told to ignore. It moves us to protect lives we are told are disposable. In this way, empathy does not only prevent harm, it repairs it. It restores dignity to those who have had it stolen, not as a favor, but as a recognition of shared humanity. In the context of global inequality, empathy reveals the deep injustices that distance and privilege often hide. It forces the comfortable to consider the cost of their convenience. It reveals the invisible hands behind everyday luxuries, the garment worker, the miner, the farmer, the child denied education. Empathy demands that we see systems not just as abstract mechanisms, but as webs of human impact. It calls into question the morality of profit without fairness, progress without inclusion, and innovation without ethics. In a truly empathetic world, no one's suffering is hidden behind the fine print, no one's humanity is considered negotiable, and no voice is too small to matter. Empathy is not just an emotion, it is an ethic. It is the foundation of cooperation, the root of compassion, and the beginning of justice. It is what allows us to imagine a future where decisions are not based solely on economics or power, but on care, dignity, and respect. And while empathy alone cannot solve the world's problems, it creates the only conditions under which those problems can truly be addressed. Because before any policy is written, before any reform is made, before any healing can begin, someone, somewhere, has to care enough to ask, to listen, and to feel. There is a moment in every human life when witnessing injustice demands a decision, to speak or to remain silent. And while silence can feel like neutrality, a way of staying safe, of avoiding conflict, of keeping peace, it is, more often than not, a quiet surrender to the very forces we claim to oppose. Silence is rarely neutral. It is not a pause. It is a permission slip. It allows oppression to deepen its roots and injustice to carry on unchecked. When we witness cruelty, discrimination, abuse, or inequality and choose to say nothing, we are not just bystanders. We become part of the problem. Silence, no matter how passive it seems, functions as complicity. It gives power to those who already hold it and strips protection from those who need it most. It says, without saying, "This is acceptable." and that message, even when unspoken, echoes loudly in the ears of the oppressed. People often choose silence not out of malice, but out of fear: fear of being wrong, fear of backlash, fear of losing comfort, relationships, or status. The desire to remain comfortable in the face of someone else's discomfort is a deeply human instinct, but it is not a moral one. Choosing silence because speaking up is inconvenient or uncomfortable is in itself a luxury. It is a privilege to turn away, to remain untouched, to live in a space where your voice feels optional rather than essential. For many, silence is not even a choice. It is enforced by systems that punish dissent, by communities that value harmony over truth, and by histories that have taught us that survival often depends on staying quiet. But those who can speak and choose not to are complicit in a structure that relies on silence to survive. When we think of historical atrocities, genocide, colonization, slavery, apartheid, systemic racism, gender-based violence, we often ask, how did this happen? How did people allow this? The answer, time and time again, is not just the actions of the perpetrators, but the silence of the many, the silence of neighbors, the silence of leaders, the silence of institutions. Oppression does not sustain itself through violence alone. It sustains itself through the quiet normalization of that violence, the whispers that say, "It's not our place," the rationalizations that say, "It's too political," the avoidance that says, "Someone else will handle it." In that silence, the machinery of oppression grinds forward, oiled not just by hate, but by indifference. In everyday life, silence often shows up in the smallest moments: when a colleague makes a sexist joke and no one objects, when a friend expresses prejudice and no one challenges it, when a policy harms the vulnerable and no one speaks out, when a person suffers in isolation and we choose not to check in. These are not passive acts. They are permissions. Every time we stay silent, we reinforce the status quo. Every time we look away, we validate the behavior we refuse to name. Every time we stay quiet in rooms where our voice might make a difference, we strengthen the system that counts on our quiet compliance. We may not have meant to side with injustice, but our silence does the work of injustice all the same. There is a myth that only loud, bold voices can change the world. But the truth is, even the softest voice, if it dares to speak, can shatter the illusion of consensus. It can interrupt the flow of normalized harm. It can let others know that they are not alone, that someone sees them, hears them, and stands with them. Speaking out does not require perfection. It requires courage. It requires the willingness to be uncomfortable, to be challenged, to get it wrong and learn anyway. The point is not to speak with certainty, but to speak with intention, to let the world know where we stand and whom we stand beside. Because when we speak, we create ripples, and those ripples make others braver. They open space. They push back against silence and say, "Not here, not this time, not again." Silence is often the first thing injustice asks of us. It does not always demand our loyalty, only our quiet. And once it has our quiet, it has everything it needs to grow. The world doesn't fall apart from noise. It falls apart from the collective hush of people too afraid or too comfortable to speak up. And in that hush, violence finds a hiding place. Bigotry finds a stage. Inequality finds protection. What we don't condemn, we allow. What we don't challenge, we normalize. And what we don't speak about becomes part of the landscape, no longer shocking, no longer urgent, no longer even seen. Feminism, in its truest form, is not a club with exclusive entry or a banner waved only by a specific group of people. It is not a movement that belongs solely to women, nor is it a theory locked in academic journals or shouted only in protest. It is a way of seeing the world, a lens that reveals the ways power and opportunity are unevenly distributed, and more importantly, a commitment to correcting that imbalance. Feminism is not only about women's rights, it is about human rights. It is about freedom, dignity, and the right to live without fear or shame, no matter one's gender. When we say feminism belongs to everyone, we are not making a polite invitation. We are speaking a fundamental truth. Because in every corner of life touched by inequality, feminism offers a way forward. It belongs to the single father raising a daughter. It belongs to the young boy taught that crying makes him weak. It belongs to the woman denied a voice, to the child questioning gender roles, to the LGBTQ+ teenager looking for a safe place to be fully seen. The resistance to feminism has never been solely about its message, but about the discomfort it brings to systems built on dominance and conformity. Those systems benefit when feminism is misunderstood, when it's reduced to man-hating, when it's dismissed as angry or radical, when it's twisted into a caricature of rebellion instead of recognized as a movement of healing and justice. These misrepresentations keep people at a distance, especially those who don't yet see how deeply they too are affected by gender expectations. Feminism is not about replacing one hierarchy with another. It's about dismantling hierarchies altogether. It's about leveling the playing field so that worth is no longer measured by someone's gender, appearance, or ability to fit a mold. In this way, feminism liberates everyone, not just the silenced and the oppressed, but also those who unknowingly carry the burden of privilege, guilt, and narrow identity. From birth, we are taught what it means to be a boy or a girl, the toys we play with, the emotions we're allowed to express, the ambitions we are encouraged to pursue. These lessons, passed down through generations and reinforced by culture, shape our sense of worth before we even understand the words for it. They teach girls to shrink themselves, to be careful, to seek validation through beauty or obedience. They teach boys to dominate, to perform toughness, to run from vulnerability, and everyone in between, non-binary, transgender, gender non-conforming, is often left erased entirely, struggling to find space in a system that was never designed to include them. Feminism recognizes this. It names it. And more than anything, it seeks to undo it, not by erasing difference, but by expanding what is possible for everyone. In the workplace, feminism pushes for equal pay not because it's a favor to women, but because it's a reflection of fairness. In relationships, feminism asks for consent, communication, and respect, not because it's trendy or political, but because it's humane. In parenting, feminism encourages sons and daughters to grow beyond the limits of old expectations, not to confuse them, but to free them. In media, feminism demands representation not for the sake of ticking boxes, but because stories shape empathy and people deserve to see themselves not only surviving but thriving. Feminism shows up in the ways we speak, the ways we listen, the policies we write, and the compassion we practice. It is not confined to marches or manifestos. It is lived in every choice to stand up, to include, to rethink, and to remember that equality is not a threat. It is a shared hope. Feminism belongs to the classroom, where girls still raise their hands less and boys are taught to lead without learning to follow. It belongs to the doctor's office, where women's pain is too often dismissed and where trans individuals are denied basic affirming care. It belongs in boardrooms where decisions are made that affect lives without including diverse perspectives. It belongs in communities where women of color, disabled women, indigenous women, and migrant women are still struggling to be heard within movements that claim to fight for all. Feminism that does not include everyone is not feminism at all. It's hierarchy in disguise. Real feminism makes space, not just for equality, but for equity, for lifting those who have been furthest behind and reimagining systems that never served us all equally in the first place. The beauty of feminism is that it is not a fixed doctrine, but an evolving force, shaped by those who carry it forward. It adapts, expands, and listens. It recognizes when it has fallen short and strives to do better. It is shaped not only by theory, but by the lived experiences of everyday people who say, "This isn't right, and I believe we can change it." When feminism welcomes everyone, it becomes unstoppable. It becomes a mirror and a map, reflecting the truths of the present while pointing toward the possibility of something more just, more compassionate, and more free. You beliefs are the quiet architecture of who we are, the unseen scaffolding that shapes our choices, values, and the way we move through the world. But belief alone, no matter how deeply felt or sincerely held, is not enough to make change. The world does not shift because someone believed in justice. It shifts when belief becomes action. When someone stands up, steps forward, and risks comfort or certainty to make their ideals real. From belief to action is the hardest bridge we will ever cross, not because it requires perfection, but because it demands courage, consistency, and the willingness to be changed by the things we say we care about. It is easy to admire equality, to quote the words of freedom, to repost justice. It is something else entirely to embody them, to practice them daily, especially when it's inconvenient, uncomfortable, or costly. There's a temptation in modern life to confuse awareness with accountability. We are surrounded by information, flooded with causes, inspired by stories of courage and rebellion. We wear our beliefs on t-shirts, in bios, in hashtags, but none of it means anything if it doesn't move us. Action is what gives belief its shape. Without it, belief becomes performance, a well-lit illusion of integrity. The distance between what we say and what we do defines the gap between potential and progress. To believe in fairness and yet stay silent when a colleague is mistreated is to protect injustice. To believe in compassion and yet ignore suffering when it doesn't affect us directly is to practice indifference. Every time we let our beliefs die in silence or delay, we become less of who we hoped we were. The world is not short on people who know right from wrong. It is short on people who are willing to act on it when it matters most. Action does not require grand gestures or headlines. In fact, the most powerful actions often begin in quiet, ordinary moments. A decision to speak up in a room where silence is easier, a choice to listen longer and judge less, a habit of sharing power rather than hoarding it. These are the seeds of change. Action grows in relationships, in workspaces, in the language we choose, in the way we vote, in what we consume and support. It asks us to bring our beliefs out of abstraction and into practice. If you believe in gender equality, how does that show up in your home? If you believe in racial justice, how do you use your voice or privilege in spaces where others have none? If you believe in human dignity, how do you respond to those who have been denied it, not just once, but daily, structurally, and publicly? There is no perfect way to act on your beliefs, only honest ones. You will make mistakes. You will be called out, challenged, corrected. But the mark of true belief is the willingness to grow through discomfort. Too often, people hold back from acting because they fear not knowing enough, not doing it right, or being judged for getting it wrong. But growth doesn't happen in theory. It happens in the doing, in learning and unlearning, in showing up even when it's awkward, uncertain, or unpopular. Action that is rooted in humility and a commitment to listen is far more powerful than belief polished for appearance and never used. Sometimes the path from belief to action is blocked not by fear, but by the illusion that our individual efforts don't matter, that the problems are too big, too embedded, too overwhelming. But change has never required perfection or scale. It has only ever required participation. It's not about changing the whole world alone, but about changing your corner of it with consistency. And when millions of people commit to aligning belief with action in their own lives, those corners begin to connect. Movements are born not just in protests, but in conversations, in classrooms, in choices made over and over again with intention. When we act, we inspire others to act. When we lead with integrity, we make space for others to join without fear of failure. True belief is not static. It evolves, and action is what keeps belief alive, responsive, and real. The journey from belief to action is not a straight line, but a lifelong loop of reflection and motion. You believe, you try, you stumble, you learn, you recommit. and each time the distance between your values and your behavior gets shorter. That alignment is not just powerful, it's transformational. It reshapes character, it builds trust, and it becomes the foundation for lasting, meaningful change. Belief gives us the reason, but action gives us the results. Without action, even the most beautiful beliefs remain trapped in our minds and hearts, unable to touch the lives they were meant to help. Feminism is not a finish line, it is a path, and we walk it together. Change doesn't require perfection, it requires participation. So don't just believe in feminism, be it. Because when we choose equality, we don't just change women's lives, we change the world. Thank you.